Let's go. Let's go. What's up? What's up? Yo, what's up, everybody? Yo, tonight we're doing an analysis of, let me make sure my volume's good. Yeah, my volume's good. Tonight we're doing the 1998 film The Thin Red Line by Terrence Malick. And forgive me, I got a lot of new setup here, so I'm trying to make sense of it all. And I hope the volume was good. Shouts out to our homeboy out there, Rooks G, because he makes a great jungle drum and bass music. Please go to his channel after this is over. Please sub to his channel and listen to his tracks. He's always got new music coming out, and he's a good friend of ours. And so we want to support him. We like supporting all the people in our sphere here, all the great artists, all the people who who have given us permission to use their art and their great music. So please let me know if everything's sounding nice. And I got the new. It took me for I know y'all don't want to know this, but it took me forever to get the new camera set up, and I can only use it on the old laptop. And so hopefully everything's good. And anyway, whatever. Move past that. I'm back at the crib University, back at the HQ. And I thought we would just kind of dive into it tonight because with this movie, The Thin Red Line, because probably, I don't know, I assume that most of y'all have seen this. If you haven't seen it, then this will be a nice intro to, in my opinion, one of the best movies of the last. I mean, this is one of the best movies ever. And I would go so far as to say that this may be the greatest war movie of all time. And I mean that seriously. Now, of course, we've done Apocalypse Now, and Apocalypse Now is, in my opinion, the greatest war movie in another sense. It's also my favorite movie. But that's a war movie in a different sense. This is sort of a more all-encompassing war movie. And one of the amazing things about this is that this film came out around the same time as Saving Private Ryan. And so we have these kind of twin pillars of World War II movies. You know, Saving Private Ryan is the European theater. This is the Japanese theater. It's about the invasion of Guadalcanal in 1943. And so we have sort of the two theaters of war during the big one during World War II. But we also have two different takes on what war means itself. And so it's a heady topic. It's pretty difficult to get into. There's been a lot of analysis of this film, and I think that it's important to look at this in a serious light, because what Terrence Malick managed to do with this movie, I'm really not overstating this. What he managed to do with this movie is to give an insight into the nature and the meaning of war, especially for people who, like me, like probably many of us who have no firsthand experience. But that's most people don't. And so I think that he really gets into the philosophical nature of what war means and man's place in existence in the crucible of human events, which is war. And it's also a great time to do this because you notice Jim Caviezel there on the cover, because he's back in the news with this new film that has just come out, and I haven't seen the film. And DPH just did a stream on the film and on Jim Caviezel's new film, on the Mel film. Listen, I'm a Mel enjoyer. I'll say this outright. I'm a Mel enjoyer, and I'm Mel for life. I love Mel Gibson. And so my reasons for not diving into that film are probably one that I share with many of you. I feel like, and I guess I can say this because I haven't seen the film, but my understanding of this new movie is that I'm thinking of it like it's an introduction to a mass audience and to people who are unaware of this topic. And that's fine. That's great. I'm great that's there. But being a person who is obviously in our conspiracy sphere here and has been for many years, I don't really need an introduction to this. I've like you guys, I've been reading about this awful stuff for a long time, for decades. And so I'm just at a place where I don't want to dive into it again. And I think that that's perfectly acceptable. But then again, I already know. So that doesn't mean that I know everything, but it means that, like you guys watching, I'm pretty sure that the things that we're going to see are things that we've been reading about for decades. And it's great that people are sort of waking up to this stuff, but I am not going to subject myself to the film, at least for now. Just, as a normie would say, I guess, for my own mental health. It's not right for right now. But I will say that Jim Caviezel has been in a number of great films. So this 1997, 1998, The Thin Red Line by Terrence Malick. He's not the star of the film. It's a true ensemble cast, but he is the central character in it. I mean, it's hard to deny, even on a first watch, even in the 90s when you watch this movie, it's hard to deny that he was the main guy in the film. Let me turn on my light here now. It's getting dark. So we're going to spend most of our time, really, I guess, looking at his work. Is that a little better? That's a little brighter. That should be a little brighter there. Yeah, gosh, it got dark really quickly. And remember, he was also in a couple of other films. He was in, he played the bad guy in Deja Vu. And we should really go back and look at Deja Vu, because Deja Vu, of course, is a movie about DARPA and about time travel with our homeboy Denzel, our favorite, one of my favorites, Denzel, and of course Val killing it. So I think we should go back and look at that at some point. But of course, Jim Caviezel from The Passion of the Christ, and then of course, most people I know are aware now that I chopped that skunk wig off. It's time for a change. It's time for a change, and it's been originally. So I know you guys don't care about this, but here's what happens. I've had long hair my whole life, and I go through phases where, I grow my hair out for a couple years and it's really long, and then I cut it short, and that's a normal sort of thing. But I can mark like phases in my life where I've done that. And so, I had really long hair in the latter part of, the last decade. And then I decided to chop it off. I needed a change. And in fact, what's interesting is I won. Here's my little humble brag. I won the Virginia High School poetry competition through Virginia Tech University when I was in high school, because I wrote a poem about cutting my hair. And I don't know, it won't be worth it without actually reading the poem to you. But it was, looking back, as a teenager, it's one of my, I don't know, probably it's one of my best lyric poems. And I was reading about Hannibal and Carthage at the time. And so when the Romans raised, the verb raise, R-A-Z-E, when they raised Carthage and salted the earth. And so I thought of that with cutting one's hair, and so that nothing else would grow. And I don't know, I'll have to find the poem for you. But anyway, but when in 2019, I decided to cut, a lot of stuff happened, and then I decided to cut my hair. And then, of course, 2020 came around, and everybody was locked down and all that stuff. And I decided to go for the terrorist hunger striker look. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just keep it long until society gets back to normal or whatever. And then eventually it kind of did. Years went by, and then I didn't cut it. So finally I decided, you know what, it's time. It's time. So it feels good. Anyway, I know that's not really important, but anyway, so maybe it's in line with the subject matter tonight. It's not exactly a military cut, but it's more in line with the subject matter that we have tonight. So this is not going to be a literary analysis, because there is a book that The Thin Red Line is based on. I cannot find the book. I can't find it. I can't find a copy of it. I'm also, by the way, waiting on my copy of Boccaccio's Decameron. I've been waiting for it for a long time. So someone sponsored that stream. So forgive me for not getting to it yet, but I'm just still waiting on the book. It's taken forever. So I'll get to that next week. I also have a couple of other streams coming up. We've got, of course, DPH just mentioned that we'll be, I'll be on his channel on Friday. We'll be doing the movie Nefarious, which is going to be an interesting one. This one, movies right now are like causing controversy or playing into the meme wars, especially with Barbie and Oppenheimer. And I've got a trip coming up in a couple weeks up to see two of my good friends. We're gonna meet up in Philadelphia, and we're gonna go see the double bill of Barbie and Oppenheimer. So I will report back and tell you about about those films. Also, we have the new, as I was mentioning before, I was getting into it. I think they're in post-production now for The Passion of the Christ 2, which is the resurrection. So, of course, we're going to look forward to that film. If you haven't seen that film, I remember going to see it in 2000. What was it? 2004, 2003 or 4, whenever it came out in Richmond. I had my girlfriend from England was coming to visit me, and we went and saw it. And wow. So yeah, I'm sure everybody's seen that. So, but yeah, one thing that I've noticed, just before we get into this, is that I watched a bunch of films when I was down there visiting my sister in Mississippi, and that was, I have the best sister. I'm sorry, everybody else out there, but I got the best little sister in the world, and she, that was exactly what I needed. It was, I got to go down there for 2 weeks and spend time with family that I love. I even got to see my cousins down there, and that was awesome. And all of my sister's friends, and it's just like it's like medicine for the soul for me. It was so refreshing, and was exactly what I needed. And so now I'm back here, and it's summertime, and it's weird because I go outside, and I had this feeling. I'm just sharing this with you. I had this feeling where I went outside today, into the backyard, and I like to spend most of my time outside. And I had this feeling today where something struck me, and it was like I was looking at the backyard again as a 17-year-old, in my youth years ago. It's just something about nature's aroma and the ambiance, the light, the way that the light hit, and the sort of the softness in the wind. And it was a really pleasant, refreshing feeling. And in a way that sort of led me on to rewatch this film, because the movie is about man's place in the cathedral, what I call the cathedral of nature, because there's a lot in this movie about how nature's cruel, Charles, says Nick Nolte. See the way it is, vines twisting all over everything, swallowing everything. But we learn that that's partly true, but not really true in the film. And so the question becomes man's place in the warfare of life, and how we fit into it, and what we're doing to ourselves. And this movie is so impressionistic and subjective that it's what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a couple of reviews and analyses that were written contemporary with the release of the film, and discuss those and give you my own thoughts, and my own sort of thesis about the movie. But it's just, I think it's a beautiful July. I'm happy to be alive, and I know that I'm happy to have my friends and family out there. And you just never know, you guys. I'm not trying to bring anybody down, because this is an uplifting stream or conversation, but you just never know. You just never know about your friends and family and your own life, and your people are here 1 second and they're gone, whether they're gone for good or they walk out, or what. You just have to appreciate people, and I guess play your own role and do the best you can. And a lot of this will lead me into, by the way, thinking about John Donne. So again, this isn't a literary analysis. We're going to talk about the film. But one thing I was talking about a second ago, when I went down there to Mississippi, and I was with my friends and family, with my sister, we watched, we love watching movies. And one thing that I noticed is that there's a theme in movies right now, which is that I guess it's an offshoot. It can't be an offshoot of the strikes that they're having right now, because that Hollywood has their strike, they're not writing and all that stuff. So the movies had to have been made before that. But one thing that's happening is that you'll notice that in many of the movies that are being released right now, they are taking exterior big shots, and they are transposing them into insular plays. So it's almost, this is what I've talked about so much in terms of the reactionary notion of art, because we've spent so much time over the last decade with Marvel movies and with big explosions and all this stuff, that there's clearly a reaction happening. And whether it's because of a lack of funds or because the studios are being strained because there's so many studios now, and because of streaming services and all this stuff. But one thing we're seeing is we're basically getting stage plays on film, and we haven't seen this for a long time. This kind of happened in the 90s. You remember when Fargo and the independent films took over the Oscars? It kind of happened then. We also had it in the 50s, and we get the sort of Eugene O'Neill type of play being shown on film, and we have James Dean and the method actors, and a lot of their films tend to be filmed plays. But we're getting that a lot now. One example of that, well, two examples of that we watched, which were basically they were the exact same film, were Run Rabbit Run, which I thought was going to be a John Updike movie, because of course Rabbit is the John Updike. We did The Witches of Eastwick, but it wasn't. And then also this film Lavender, and that had Abby Cornish, and I just watched Abby Cornish in Limitless. I taught a class on film and transcendence in film, and so we did the movie Limitless. And so Abby Cornish popped up. Abby Cornish, I like Abby Cornish. She's also frequently in like Monarch type movies, because she was in what do you call it? The one where she played Baby Doll with Oscar Isaac, and not I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, she's also in Candy, which is a good movie with Heath Ledger. Difficult movie to watch, Heath Ledger and Jeffrey Rush. But anyway, she's sort of in that. She is in many of these themed movies. And so she's in this movie Lavender and Run Rabbit Run. Rather than give you a full analysis of those movies, basically they were the same exact movie. A mother is going crazy and has suffered some sort of traumatic head injury, and has basically I predicted it right away when I saw both movies, which is that she has been creeped on early on. She's been through some sort of psychosexual torture, and she's dissociating and finding herself strangling or killing her own kids in the movie. That's both movies. And so that's going to continue to be a theme. And that, in a way, plays into the Jim Caviezel phenomena thing that's going on now. So should we just dive into the movie here? First of all, let me give a special shout out to a couple of people before we dive into this. One is my homeboy Digital Minefield out there, Matty. He says, out of all the heavy hitters in this film, who do you think gave the best performance? That's a good question. Rather than dive too much into that right now, I will just say that's an appropriate question, but this is a true ensemble cast. And one of the things that Terrence Malick does in the sort of the same vein as Stanley Kubrick, but in an opposite way. Stanley Kubrick will have an ensemble cast where he may have one or two big names in the cast, right? Like think of Eyes Wide Shut with Tom and Nicole. Think of Slim Pickens in Dr. Strangelove, but think of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? You see the cast, and there aren't he chooses a cast. Basically, he casts his movies in a way where the characters are submerged, or the real actors are submerged into the life of the film. Okay, so the exception to that would obviously be Eyes Wide Shut, because my theory about that is that Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were chosen for that film specifically because of who they were, because they were meant to reflect their status in the pyramidal structure in which they find themselves amongst the Eyes Wide Shut elites, right? And so that the audience will be drawn to those characters in a way. I mean, remember when Nicole Kidman is dancing between the twin pillars, and we see them as sort of, they are celebrities or they are higher ups, just like Bill is, he's a doctor and he's high up, but he's not in the same universe as Ziegler and the elites, and that's why he's chosen for that role. So I think that my thesis for that is that those actors were chosen almost unknowingly on their part for a role in the film where their life's role was playing a meta version of the role in the film, if that makes any sense. This film is interesting because we have a huge cast of well-known actors. Not there aren't any superstars. I mean, the biggest superstar in the film would be George Clooney, and it's interesting that you look back, and actually at the time the film was released, he wasn't yet full Clooney like how we think of him today. And that's why he's in the last like 10 minutes of the film, and he plays he plays the father, whereas the sergeant will be the mother, and they're going to run their unit. But we have, John Travolta. Remember in the 90s, John Travolta had just come off of Pulp Fiction, and he was having a renaissance, but he still could be considered not, he's not like a superstar who overrides the rest of the cast. Nick Nolte was a big actor. Sean Penn was a big actor. But one thing that he does is he allows all of these characters to truly represent who they are in the movie, in terms of, we see these World War II combat soldiers. They're soldiers, they're not Marines. They're actually following on the heels of the Marines in their initial invasion of Guadalcanal, but they're army. And they almost look like archetypes. The way their faces are drawn in terms of the palette, right, of the film, like it's a painting. This is like an impressionistic painting that's been animated. And so the characters truly fit. I mean, this is great casting. And the film does a great job of not letting the actors overtake the subject matter. In other words, like, you see Jared Leto in the film, and you're kind of like, oh, that's Jared Leto. I mean, it's in the 90s and he's young, but he doesn't speak. And you're just like, it's another guy, it's another soldier, and we don't know what's going to happen to him. I would say, shouts out to Elias, who says, bro, he sends a $4.99 super chat. Hold on, let me read this real quick before I get too far. Elias says, bro, epic classic cinema for the heat of summertime. Let's go. Bravo, Base. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think this is a great summertime flick. The only thing that's better as a summertime flick than this would be a stream based on the coldest movies, which I thought about doing. I may do that coming up in, if we get into a serious heat wave in July. Because one thing I think about when I'm thinking about movies is it's actually interesting how much my own reading of just reading it. I mean, I kind of, I have a quasi-eidetic memory for reading material, at least for the times when I read them. And so when I read something, or when I read something in my youth, especially, I also remember everything, all the feelings that went along with it. I'm sure that's common amongst people, especially if it was something that struck with you. But one thing that I've recently become aware of is how much the local newspaper reviewer from the 90s, this dude, Daniel Neiman, I still remember his name, and how much his reviews really affected me, because I remember exactly what he said about this movie and what he was saying about the times. And a lot of that is going to play into this. And that goes beyond, his reviews meant something because they went beyond just the initial movie review that you see now, giving it a number of stars. They went into an analysis of the film, which I appreciated, especially as a teenager. So where was I? And before I forget, yes, I got to give a shout out to the real John Connor, who dropped a $20 super chat right before this. Thank you, real John Connor. I really appreciate you so much. And also, big shout out to Kevin out there. Kevin, while I was gone, dropped me a huge super chat, and said, he just sent me, I don't even want to say how much. I don't want to, I don't know. It might be too much to say. But Kevin sent a gigantic donation and said, just wanted to say thanks for all the great streams on your YouTube channel. I came across you from Tristan Haggard's stream when you guys were talking about Notes from the Underground. I went back to the beginning of your channel, and I've listened to about 20 streams so far, trying to catch up on to your latest streams. Figured it's time I donated. Anyways, thanks again. Great streams, and I hope you keep it going for many years. Take care. That means so much to me. That is really kind. And that's very, very thoughtful of you. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate you. I appreciate everybody out there, and I thank you all for being with me here. You know, I gotta say, just an aside here for a second. I'm not trying to be too sentimental, or, you know, like Norm Macdonald said, he had no truck for the sentimental. And I'm not trying to be too personal here, but I will say that, you know, when you look at material that we go through here and on our friends' channels, you know, and we look at the world, it can be disconcerting at times, when you start to consider your own place in things. Okay. And what I mean by that is that I love going over literature. I mean, I do this for a living, and I love going over literature. And that's what I've always done, and what I'll always do is discuss and deconstruct literature and see how words fit into a worldview and discuss meaning in life, because that's what art is. But it can be, there can come a point where you wonder, what's it all for? Okay. And do you know what I mean by that? And so I've just really found myself wanting to dive into my own. At some point, we have to create. You know, we have to use. God gives everyone talents, whether they know it or not, and God gives us things. And so, at some point, we have to stop talking about just what other people do, and we have to do things ourselves, right? And we have to contribute, because I just feel that very strongly. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing here, but I am going to be working on a lot of my own work coming up in the future, because I know I have something to say and something to write, and I've been working on it for a long time, and I just want to God has given me something, you know, and he's given us all something, and I want to this may sound weird, but I want to try to glorify him by using what he's given me, I guess. And so I'll be working on that more, and whether people, you know, in the end, appreciate or like it or not is up to them. But I just feel like at some point we have to do our own thing. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, you guys? I know. I'm sorry. I'm kind of going off on a little tangent there, but I just thought it was important to share that. Yo, shouts out to Tech Noir Graphics, my good friend Tech Noir Graphics, Mikhail Mixkey. Please find him at Tech Noir Graphics at Instagram, and check him out. He sent me $10 just now for books. Thank you so much. I can really use that. Thank you so much. And coming up, okay, last thing before I keep going on this. And shouts out to Kira also, by the way, who supported me out there, who sent me a super chat, I think, after the last stream. And shouts out to Jason Skull, who sent me $10. Jason, our great supporter, Jason, who sent me $10 on PayPal. Really appreciate you. And so coming up, I'm going to be covering a couple of things. I've got I'll be with DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos, on Friday, covering Nefarious, the movie Nefarious, again, which is one of these plays that's filmed. What do you guys think of the new camera? Is it clearer? It's a GoPro. It took me forever to get this thing connected, and I could not get it connected to the other computer, so I've connected it to this, so I'll just be using it when I'm doing StreamYard. But hopefully it's a little better. I mean, what do you think of this? Like, I can give you a different, here's what it looks like. Here's the different view. This is what it looks like. This is this is what I look like. This is what I look like here. Look at all these books. See, this is what you don't see. This is one room. This is one room. This isn't even the library office. This is just my living room. But I got books everywhere. So what do you think of that view? So I finally figured out how to do that. It took forever. And then I've also got this view right here. That's not as good. All right. And next thing I need to do is fix my mic and get all that worked out. So anyway, coming up, I will also be with Digital Minefield, Maddie, Real Cooter Brown, and that will be on Thursday. And we're doing the Mammoth book, Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. Thank you to Maddie for choosing the most mammoth book ever. I mean, it's not Gravity's Rainbow, so that's good. And I've read a bunch of Tom Wolfe before. I'd never read Bonfire of the Vanities, and honestly, I'm slogging through this book. But I'm going to bring in the film. I watched the film version of it by Brian De Palma, so we're going to talk about that. But it's an interesting book. It's mostly interesting because Sherman, the protagonist in the book, works at Pearson Pierce. He works at the same mergers and acquisitions as Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. So that's funny. But it's, kind of a new journalism satire on the 80s and on it's not Infinite Jest. And I'm not going to cover Infinite Jest here. If somebody wants to donate, then I'll do Gravity's Rainbow. But that will be interesting. And then also coming up next week, we were going to do it tonight, but something came up. So coming up, I think next Wednesday, we've got a special guest, and that is my friend Grunt from Boiler Room. If you've watched me on Boiler Room, you've seen our friend Grunt Smash, and he's going to give us a unique and authentic perspective into the content of the film. What film are we doing? Jarhead, Jake Gyllenhaal's Jarhead. So we're going to be doing, I'm like on a war movie kick right now. So we're going to be doing Jarhead with Grunt. That'll be really good. And also, I've got a stream coming up. I'm going to do sometime, I guess, next week on Shakespeare on Love. So we're going to get back to classic literature. I think people liked that last stream I did on Ernest Hemingway's Lost Generation. It didn't get quite the views that the other ones are getting, but that's okay. I was proud of it, and I think we did a good job. And I can't honestly. I'm not bragging here, folks, but where else are you going to get a 2 to 3 hour deep dive into the form and content of Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, and The Lost Generation, covering 2 Hemingway books on YouTube in a way that's authentic and personal, but also objective and talking about worldviews? I don't think you're getting that anywhere else. So I'm still proud of that one. But we're going to do Taming of the Shrew, As You Like It, and what's the other one? And Much Ado About Nothing coming up. So, and also Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. So we're going to talk about Shakespeare on love and what is classical love in Shakespeare. Okay. So right now we're going to discuss The Thin Red Line, 1998. The Thin Red Line is by Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick did Days of Heaven. He's done a bunch of other films, but honestly, I'm not concerned with any of his other films because, for one thing, I think that Do you remember when VH1 had that show about one-hit wonders, right? And it's kind of like, oh, let's make fun of the one-hit wonders, right, who make music. Well, guess what? If you can write one true sentence, says Hemingway, if you can write one song that makes people happy, that makes people joyful, right, and that they will remember, then you've done your job. You've created something. You created great art. And so I think that I don't know. I think that for Terrence Malick, none of his other films concern me. It's only this film. If this film is the one that lasts, then so be it, because this is one of the great films. And what I'll say is that this is a difficult one to comprehend when you first dive into the movie, because you expect it, especially at the time it came out, and if you've never seen the movie, you expect it to be a kind of a partner to Saving Private Ryan. So here's my thing about Saving Private Ryan, and a lot of my thoughts have sort of evolved as a result of Rob Ager's own analyses of he's devoted a lot of time on to Saving Private Ryan, and I think that he's exactly on point with this. Rob Ager over at Ager Bytes, right, or Collative Learning, he does great film analysis. And one thing that he's pointed out is that, especially in the 90s, there was this whole spate of films that purported to be anti-war films, especially with Saving Private Ryan. And so what they mean by that, I suppose, is you have Spielberg making a film showing the horror of war in a realistic or at least true sense. And that is supposed to convey to the audience that war is hell and that we should never fight wars again. Okay, well, that's great in theory. But in practice, what it actually does is flips on itself and advertises for war. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is that you can't, especially as a dude, watch Saving Private Ryan and think that you're not subconsciously putting yourself in the view in the place of the people in the movie. That's just what happens. I mean, maybe I don't think it just happens with me. I think that that's a thing. That's the reason that I like adventure movies. It's the reason I like disaster movies or post-apocalyptic movies, because if you're a guy and if you grew up, playing war in the woods with your friends when you were a little kid, then like that's your dream. It's inherent in you to do that. So when you watch a war movie, you think, okay, when the pillbox comes down, or when the door comes down and they got to make their way through the water and they're going on to, the beaches at Normandy, where would I go? What would I do? If this guy got shot, where would I go? That's just what you do. That doesn't mean that like, we're trying to be soldiers or we want to be or anything. It just means that like, that's a natural thing for a guy to do when you're watching a movie. And so when that happens, all of the horror in the movie kind of gets pushed aside in a sense. You know consciously that it's awful. And like the scene where the guy's crying for his mom in Saving Private Ryan, or when the guy gets his legs blown off, or when he's pulling the guy on the beach, or when the guy gets shot in the helmet, he takes off his helmet and the guy says, "You lucky son of a bitch," and then he gets shot in the head. So all those things are true, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't put yourself in that situation. And if anything, what it does is it proves that war is this crucible of human existence where God's providence shows itself in extreme versions. Because what the soldiers often do is they will question, why does that guy get to live? Or why does that guy get to die and that guy didn't? Why did the bullet hit him and it didn't hit me 2 feet over? That's the question that they're always asking themselves. So, yeah, Schindler was 1993. Schindler, by the way, is a lot of people think about Schindler's List, but they haven't actually seen the movie. You should go back and watch Schindler's List. It is a fantastic movie because of a couple of things. I won't get too deep into that movie, but I will say that Ray Fiennes' villain is probably the arch villain of films, and for not the reasons that you would think it would be, according to what you know about the film. You know, you can only really have an arch villain if he's somebody that has something that you can relate to or that you care about. I'm not saying that you relate to Amon Goethe. I'm saying that there are certain things in the movie and certain behavioral traits and certain things that people say and do that allow audiences to relate to those characters because they have to, because otherwise they're cold characters and they're non-existent. So he does a fantastic job in that movie of portraying that character in a way that sort of subverts the audience's expectations. Also, there are two other scenes in that movie that are great. One is clearly stolen from Citizen Kane, and that is that there's a great shot in Citizen Kane where we have this long shot where we are looking up a staircase at Kane, and Orson Welles basically created this shot where it gives a long perspective to make us, the audience, think that we're sort of dissociated from the character, that they're far above us, but it's just an illusory trick in the way that the film is presented. And that's stolen outright by Spielberg. I mean, purposely so. That's fine because great artists, will steal. But they do that with Schindler when Liam Neeson is at the top of a staircase in that film. There's one particular shot that's amazing. And then the other is at the end of the film when they present Liam Neeson with he takes off his ring? He has a ring and he drops it he drops it accidentally. And what he does is he's like crawling around in the dust looking for this ring. And what it shows you is that this larger than life character who is responsible for thousands of souls is now brought down low into the to dust you shall return. It's a great scene. It's a great example of showing, not telling. Now back to this film. This is a great film because it almost becomes an anti-war film. Okay. And I'm going to show you an article that relates to that. One of the things that this does is it's a war film, but it begins in a complete idyllic pastoral island of peace where Wit, who is Jim Caviezel, and one of his buddies have gone AWOL. And they filmed it like in the Solomon Islands. Ever since I saw this movie, I always wanted to go to the South Pacific and Solomon Islands. And they are basically like they become native. I mean, they're just like they got their army shorts on, but it's like they are living Robinson Crusoe on this island, and they are in perfect harmony with nature. There are families around them. They're living sort of a primitive existence away from war. The way the soundtrack plays, it becomes almost angelic with choirs. And the main thing about this movie that strikes the viewer is the impressionistic voiceover dialogue, or rather monologue. I mean, a few characters have a series of monologues that are completely antithetical to any sort of movie script. It's this movie could go very wrong very fast. And I remember Daniel Neiman writing that in his review in the 90s, because if you take some of the quotes from the film and you read them out of context, you might question for yourself, what are they talking about and how could this be in a movie? This sounds so ridiculous. But in the context of the beauty of the film, it works. So let me give you an example. At the beginning of the film, there are lines and it says, "Be with me now." If I go first, I'll wait for you there on the other side of the dark waters. Oh my gosh. First of all, that is not a good example of what I'm talking about, because that's a straight brilliant line. Because first of all, the character is speaking in an inner monologue to me. He's speaking to me. He's speaking to you. It's in the second person. Now, we know that the character is talking to either himself or to the woman that he loves, like as if he's writing a diary in the air. But it almost becomes a spiritual diary, like that. This is from me to you. This is almost Whitman-esque, right? Because I'll stop somewhere waiting for you, he says in Leaves of Grass. It's, why is he talking to me, the reader, or to me, the viewer? And so we put ourselves in the place of this character. And when he says the dark waters, well, he's on the other side of the Pacific. So it's literal dark waters. He's gone AWOL. But he's also referring to the Stygian blackness of the underworld here. And he's saying, if I die and I'm forced to cross over to the other side, I will wait for you on the other side. Which is brilliant in light of, we have two guys who've gone AWOL, and you know what they always say about soldiers, right? That you're fighting for the guy on the right and the left of you, right? So that they're fighting for each other. There's a point in the movie where one guy stands up and he says, it's all about property. This whole thing is about property. It's all a property dispute. But that's not why the guys are fighting in the war. They're fighting for each other. Does that make sense? So then he says, who are you who live in all these many forms? You too are the source of all that's going to be born. You are glory, mercy, peace, truth. You give calm a spirit. I understand it. Courage, the contented heart. So, oh my God. Do you understand? Do you understand what he's doing here? He's talking to God. The character is talking to God. This is Jim Caviezel's character talking to God. And he's finding God in the most unlikely place, which is AWOL from a horrific war on a lonely island. And this reminds me of John Donne, right? In Meditation 17. I'll bring Meditation 17 up in a minute. But the point of just those excerpts is that the dialogue in the movie, especially the inner monologues that keep occurring in the movie, are kind of like a neural link, brainwave straight from the movie to us. So why don't we look at, I want to look at a couple of different excerpts here and reviews. And I'm going to take you through these. So let's see here. Let me share the screen here. Let's take you through. Let's see. What's a good one to start with? How about the Criterion Collection? This Side of Paradise. Okay. Share. Okay. All right. This one's called The Thin Red Line, This Side of Paradise by David Starrett. This is from 2010. Okay. So I'm just going to take you through this article right here. And it says, The Thin Red Line, arguably the greatest war film ever made, ended 2 decades of silence from Terrence Malick, cinema's wandering auteur. Now, we've talked about the auteur and how the auteur is kind of the latest iteration was the 70s, right, with Robert Evans and the allowance of the auteur to and a director's singular vision to control the film. That was railed against in the 80s with the big 80s with Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer and the high concept films, but then they get back into that in the 90s. And of course, they go back in time to World War II as the ultimate canvas for film, because it allows for the a proliferation of beauty in terms of what the auteur spirit here. He says the silence wasn't entirely self-imposed, since during this time he tried to launch a few productions, including a tale of 19th century psychoanalysis and a Jerry Lee Lewis biopic that didn't reach the shooting stage. But mainly he appears to have bided his time, gathering ideas and inspirations while living in Paris and Los Angeles, then rejoining the industry for his most ambitious project to date, a World War II epic as poetic and philosophical as his previous pictures, Badlands in 1973 and Days of Heaven 1978, and larger in scale than both of them combined. This is a huge scale film. By all accounts, it took long negotiations for a team of producers to get Malick back behind the camera. Hollywood had gone through drastic changes while he walked the earth for 20 years, like Kane in Pulp Fiction, and the new corporate chiefs preferred market-friendly blockbusters to offbeat art pictures. Do you get how this is a combination of those two? With support gathered from Fox 2000 and some independent production companies, Malick started shooting in June 1997, wrapping up 100 days and more than 1 million feet of film later, on time and on budget. The result is a masterpiece, a Malick masterpiece, telling a powerfully written, superbly acted story that casts new light on his characteristic themes of nature and culture, thought and language, humanity and inhumanity, paradise lost and transcendence found. Malick's legendary refusal to do interviews or comment on his work makes it hard to answer certain basic questions, such as why he wanted to film James Jones's 1962 novel to begin with. Based on Jones's own experiences, the Thin Red Line takes on Guadalcanal, the strategically located Pacific island where Allied troops confronted Japanese forces by land, sea, and air between August 1942 and February 1943. This was a costly but pivotal campaign, marking the transition to offensive operations that brought victory for the Allies in the Pacific Theater. Taking a grunt's eye view, shouts out to my homeboy Grunt out there doing Jarhead next week. The novel follows a company of infantrymen who arrive as reinforcements when the fighting is well underway. The story is long, dense, deterministic, and grim, combining realistic descriptions of combat with intimate accounts of soldiers' thoughts and impressions. Now, I take issue with the fact that it's deterministic. It's not. It's actually not deterministic. It's not chaotic, but it's also not deterministic. It's somewhere in the middle. The first time I read it, I found it more cumbersome and conventional than Jones's earlier and better war novel, From Here to Eternity, 1951. Who's that? Burt Lancaster? From Here to Eternity is the one where it's Burt Lancaster on the beach kissing the woman, World War II. And although its psychology seems truer and more complex to me today, its major differences from Malick's previous pictures, including its faraway setting, historical background, and large cast of characters, make it an unexpected choice for such a quintessentially poetic filmmaker. Now, one of the things that he does here with the faraway setting is that he accomplishes America and the American spirit in a faraway place. And we have a sense of what he mentioned earlier, paradise lost and transcendence regained. So the question becomes how the characters are able to make their way through this war zone. And it's not just a physical war zone. It's a war zone of the mind. And it's a war zone that we see in the movie where they are pitted against other opposing characters with differing worldviews and an opposing sense of what the world means. The biggest example of that is Wit, Jim Caviezel, pitted against Sean Penn's character. Sean Penn's character is, for all intents and purposes, what you could describe as a humanistic character, but he's actually more of a straight atheist in the movie. He tells Wit, there ain't no world but this one. And Wit says, I can take anything you dish out. I'm twice the man you are. And Wit allows himself, he's willing to go and be a stretcher bearer in a combat zone, which is a kind of a designation for AWOL and for people that they still need. They can't, they're not going to shoot them. They're not going to try them. They're just going to put them in the battle zone with no weapons. But then he finds himself volunteering and picking up a weapon and being one of the major forces in the battle. He's supremely brave in this movie. And so again, there's this weird dichotomy between a character who is seen to be just a prototypical spiritual Christian in the movie, in the sense that he is in awe of God's creation, and he adores and loves the sanctity of human life, as seen by the whole first sequence of the movie, where he's amongst the children and the natives, and yet he's willing to fight, which is a great thing in a film, because it would be so easy for the filmmakers in any of these films to have a character who like turns out to be a coward, because that's the easy way, that when that's not true at all, right? And of course, the other side of that is that Sean Penn, who is not a likable character in this, is in the end likable, because he experiences an empathy for Jim Caviezel's character when he dies in the movie, and he weeps for him. He tries to make himself hard. He tries to say that he doesn't care about anybody. He doesn't care about anything. And all we can do is look out for ourselves in the midst of this battle. But we see that his actions don't allow for that. In fact, he volunteers to go up and save the guy up on the hill who's been shot, and he wants to pick him up on his shoulders and carry him. He's a hero. And then when he comes back, Starles says, "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star," and he says, something like, "If I hear another word about you recommending me for an award, Captain," he doesn't want to be awarded for it. He doesn't. So everything that he says in this and everything he does, it's like the characters constantly turn on a head what we expect of them, because of the strange and unnatural nature of the war in which they found themselves. It's likely that a couple of key factors drew Malick to the novel. One was his fascination with ordinary people in extraordinary situations. Exactly right. Many critics have discussed Malick's intellectual bent, his training in philosophy, his study of German thinker Martin Heidegger, his brief professorial career. What rarely get mentioned are more routine parts of his biography: playing high school football, working as a farmhand, writing for popular magazines like Life and Time that reflect an interest in unremarkable folks. Almost every man in the Thin Red Line is an everyman. That's a great sentence. Lost in the wilderness, struggling to survive under conditions as baffling as they are horrific. Among the most important to the film are Lieutenant Colonel Tall, Nick Nolte, who hopes the fighting will get him a promotion; First Sergeant Welsh, Sean Penn, a battle-weary man whose pragmatism borders on cynicism; and Private Wit, Jim Caviezel, whose perception of a transcendent spark in even the most hardened and afflicted people is at the narrative and philosophical center of the film. Malick's sympathy goes out to some characters more than others, but his sensitive portrayals testify to his profound engagement with all of their lives. It really is masterful what he does in this movie. We see such a large cast of characters, all of whom are supposed to fade into the backdrop of the military action that's taking place. And one thing that's great is we see a bunch of character actors that we've seen in a ton of other movies, and we sort of don't know their names. And then that speaks to the fact that they become everymen in the military action, but we care about who they are. We don't need to know their names or their characters' names or their actors' names. And so even when we see Sean Penn and Woody Harrelson or Jared Leto or Nick Stahl or Adrian Brody, all these people are in the movie, but they have small roles. But the roles are only small in terms of the length of time of the film footage. They're actually huge in terms of their impact on both the audience and on the other characters in the film. I think Malick was also intrigued by the tremendous contrast between story and setting in the film, where savage combat rips bodies and minds apart on a tropical island of stunning beauty. So in a way, it becomes like we've discussed with Lord of the Flies or J.M. Coetzee Crusoe. The book and film both contain hard-hitting battle sequences, especially during the company's protracted effort to take a hill protected by a heavily armed Japanese bunker. But where Jones concentrates on naturalistic military and psychological detail, Malick gives full play to philosophical ideas as well. Opulent nature imagery is his most recognizable cinematic trademark. But crucially, he finds human personalities and behavior no less natural than their surroundings, a fact that's especially resonant when the environment is a jungle where life and death, creation and destruction are continuously and ubiquitously intertwined. At times, the thin red line seems pessimistic, suggesting that forces of degeneration and regeneration are not one power, but two, as Witt puts it, forever battling each other with humanity caught in the crossfire. Okay, that is the major point in the film, because he's trying to figure out where he, at one point in the movie, he says, where does this evil come from? Is this one nature or two? Where do human beings fit into this? Why do we find ourselves in the midst of all of this strife? But I think that there's a resolution in the film, because we see that, for one, we see that unlike in Saving Private Ryan, for example, where if it's an as Rob Ager points out, if it's an anti-war film, then why are the bad guys presented as subhuman, when that is exactly what the movie itself is supposed to be railing against? In other words, Saving Private Ryan is about the European theater in war, and about how the Germans treated their opponents as subhuman, and therefore we got in the war because we're trying to fight for the human dignity of all people. If that's the case, then why in the film are the Germans presented as humanoid cretins who look exactly alike, and there's no difference between them? Because that is the case in the film. This film does a remarkable job of presenting the American forces overtaking a hill on Guadalcanal. It takes them a long time to get to the top of this hill, and then it's being defended by like 5 guys inside a bunker with machine guns. But then they start coming at us, and then we find ourselves, in the back of your mind, respecting the fact that they're fighting for their peace. So, in other words, the war is between two equal and opposite sides, and there's some sort of gentlemanly dignity in the war. When they finally overtake the position, and Nick Nolte wants them to overtake the hill, and we see like how nature's been burned out in the trees, and then we see all the exposed roots of the trees, and then we see all these foxholes everywhere. And even while the Americans are going through and dropping grenades in the foxholes, we still see that the Japanese look individualistic. They look different from one another, and they are presented with faces and personalities and a sense of equal struggle that is inherent in the war, in the nature of war. In other words, you're not supposed to feel sympathy. It's not supposed to make you feel sympathy for the Japanese or for the bad guys in that situation. It's just supposed to make you realize that you still have human beings fighting human beings. And so if you're going to have a war that's an anti-war film, then it would serve the purpose to make sure that humans are presented as humans. Does that make sense? I think that's quite an astounding thing that he does with this. He says, let's skip down here. The film's first image is of a crocodile slithering into concealment, signaling the danger and violence that dwell in nature, whether or not civilized intruders add to the fray with murderous mechanisms of their own. Yet in the end, Malick, got an ant on my computer. Get off of here. Are you serious? Oh my gosh. Gross. Well, that's summertime, folks. All right, sorry. Let's see. Where did I go? I lost it. Wittgenstein. Yeah, in the end, Malick puts forth the optimistic belief with an almost Gnostic tinge. There you go. There's Gnosticism in movies again, that the cosmos is essentially harmonious in its spiritual wholeness, if not its material particularities. Darkness and light, strife and love, a voiceover muses in the final scene. Are they workings of one mind, the features of the same face? So this is where it becomes sort of Zoroastrian and Gnosticism. But Malick's answer for this, he says, is yes, The crocodile reappears only once as a harmless captive of the soldiers, and while military violence is the narrative's driving force, sunstruck images of grass, trees, magnificently colored birds, and idealized native Melanesians recur throughout the film as well. Neither darkness nor light can be said to win the day. Malick respects and reveres them both, regarding them less as categories of physics, biology, and art than as transcendent realities that abide within and beyond the world of appearances we inhabit. Malick agrees with Heidegger that humanity's fundamental mistake is to use the intellect and technology as means of controlling the world rather than dwelling organically with its mysteries, the most daunting of which is death. With this in mind, he weaves conflicting impulses toward nature to harmonize with it and to prevail over it into the very fabric of the thin red line. His great creative passions, nuances of light, subtleties of camera movement, rapport between word and picture, all reflect his conviction that cinematic reality is reality and that film, treated with due reverence and expertise, is able to absorb not just patterns of luminosity, but also the transcendent essences of people, places, and things. It's a good essay. Malick's devotion to cinematic sight and sound is equaled by his commitment to the aesthetics of language. Okay, this is what we're concerned with. The Thin Red Line is about words as much as it's about anything. More precisely, it's about the intimate interconnection between word and image, which Malick explores in truly audacious ways, especially in the scenes with voiceovers. The more I've watched The Thin Red Line, the more unsure I've become about how some of the voiceovers correspond with people on the screen. So many characters have similar accents, speech patterns, and tones of voice that even a key passage like the darkness and light soliloquy is impossible to pin with certainty to a particular speaker. That's absolutely true. I've seen this movie dozens of times, and the most significant time I would say I saw it was I saw it at the cinema at Queen's University of Belfast, 2005, with an intermission with my friend Gavin. And I think that time when I saw it on the big screen was the time where I realized just what this guy's saying, or this writer is saying, that the voiceovers don't match with the characters, but it doesn't matter because they seem to be disembodied voices. And the disembodied voices almost are supposed to reflect, you realize, are supposed to reflect what you yourself would be thinking with the best words in the best order, as Wordsworth says about the definition of poetry in that situation. It's almost like you cannot describe a war or this setting in a way that could ever match this. It's only in this one particular instance. Jesse says, I've tried to watch this movie 20 years ago, but it bored me. Well, I mean, I can see that it might bore someone. I think this is a particular kind of movie. And if it bored you, I guess Saving Private Ryan is your type of movie. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is a superior type of movie, and not superior in terms of like, you know, it's a higher art. In fact, it's high art because it's almost lower art, because it's taking the everyman. It's taking all of these various characters in the movie in terrible situations and trying to squeeze beauty out of what it is, right? He says, this isn't just because Malick wants to separate the characters from their words, just the opposite. He wants to underscore the fact that human beings are bathed in language at every moment, and that language may ultimately be the best, most lasting facet of human experience, able to glide and soar even when the bodies associated with it are dying and decaying in killing fields below. Everyday language, wrote Ludwig Wittgenstein, another modern philosopher Malick takes to heart, is part of the human organism and is no less complicated than it. Taking this unity as a given, Malick explores not only the social functions of spoken language, but also the meditative functions of unspoken inner speech, often heightened and expanded by music that privileges emotional depth over linear logical meaning. Malick accomplishes this most movingly when words, music, and cinematography unfold in counterpoint, contrasting and converging in polyrhythmic waves. As the film approaches the 2-hour mark, for instance, a relatively minor character named Private Dale threatens a traumatized Japanese prisoner with brutal treatment. The captive, who doesn't understand a thing Dale is saying, speaks a few soft phrases in Japanese, and in the background, Hans Zimmer's magisterial score quotes the interrogative trumpet line of the unanswered question, the 1906 tone poem that composer Charles Ives described as a cosmic landscape echoing with the unanswerable question of existence. By the way, this is maybe the only film of Hans Zimmer's where I like Hans Zimmer's score. I usually detest Hans Zimmer because, like, maybe it's just with Christopher Nolan movies. I like Christopher Nolan movies, but I don't like how Hans Zimmer's score it plays the entire movie, and because it becomes a substitute for emotional depth that we're supposed to get through the drama. In other words, it tells us what to feel. Like, we know when we hear synthetic violin, when a synthetic violin note or score come into the scene in a kind of a soft echo, that we're supposed to feel a tinge of sadness, right? It's telling us what to think. But in this movie, it doesn't do that. It perfectly matches it. It's a counterpoint, like he says. Another superb example comes when Tall orders Captain Staros. Actually, I always thought, and I'm going to keep calling him Starls because it sounds like Nick Nolte calls him Starls, to execute a frontal attack on the Japanese bunker, and Starls refuses to obey, seeing the mission as suicidal. Their argument, conducted over portable field telephones, is filmed in a conventional back-and-forth pattern with occasional cutaways to other soldiers. Yet the sequence carries unconventional power, due partly to the performance. Nolte's volcanic rage versus Codius's reasoning calm, but more to Malick's superb orchestration of audiovisual details, the contrasting vocal timbres, the progressively tightening close-ups, the sunlight striking one side of Tall's face, the bent-back rigidity of his finger on the handset, and above all, the brooding current of low strings on the soundtrack, which transforms what might have been a merely dramatic scene into something close to the musical form called mellow declamation, fusing voices and instruments into a single expressive force. Exactly when Starls begins declaring his refusal, moreover, the music relaxes its tension and moves to a higher, brighter register, again enhancing the moment's emotional strength. This is total cinema of the highest order. It really is. It's unbelievable. There's something that occurs, by the way, in that particular scene where when Starls tells Nick Nolte that he's not going to take the hill, there's this thing that happens to Nick Nolte. It's very subtle, but Nick Nolte is, in a way, genuflecting. He's on one knee. He's got his rigid finger on the button. He's got his gigantic, field telephone up to his ear, and he's got this kind of colonel's baton, like, in his hand, where he's directing the movements. See, Nick Nolte, obviously, his character sees himself in the classical mode of it's like with Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now, right? He knew he wasn't going to get so much as a scratch during this war. His dad was in the war. His granddad was in the war. His great granddad was in the war. He's following in an officerial tradition where he's directing troops, and he feels like his words are supposed to be followed to the letter. But the reality of it is that he's got this guy who refuses to take the hill because he knows that his men are going to be slaughtered going over the ridge. But there's this wonderful thing that happens, and it's really subtle, and it's amazing that it happens because this is shot on location in the sunlight. There's like green waves of grass, kind of Americana outside of American, right, with amber waves of grain, with these troops in kind of olive drab, and he's on the field telephone, and when Starls tells him that he's not going to move, Nick Nolte, like, is about to say something back, but he stops, and he looks up, and his eyes open wide, and, like, there's a flash of blue across his face. It's something that, like, only this film can accomplish, because It's not done in post-production. It's clearly organic. It clearly happens at the time, and it's an accident. But it's like this flash of brilliant blue that goes over Nick Nolte's singular eye, and you can see the reaction and the awareness to what Starles has just told him, and that he's going to have to deal with it. In other words, the acting in this, Maddie asked a question earlier about the acting and what I think of the acting in this movie. The acting is supreme in this movie because the characters are all, we hear a lot about Saving Private Ryan. They had to go through boot camp, and, they had to, understand what it was like to, take the Sword Beach and Juneau and Gold and Omaha and, all this stuff. But this movie, we don't have any of that. We don't have interviews with Terrence Malick. In other words, this is what I've said all along on this channel, that we don't need to know anything about the artist himself. All we have is his vision, his artwork, his palette, his words. And with this, that's all combined into a film. We don't know what he intended, and it doesn't matter. All we have is the finished result, the product. And the characters are so ensconced in the actual film, it feels real. It feels real, but it feels beyond real. So his reaction to what Starles tells him is honest. There's no other way to describe it. It's completely honest. This is a great review. How do I get it back? How do I get you back up here? Go back up on the screen. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get this back. Where did you go? Let me remove that. There we go. Okay. And it says, no, this is a different one. This is a different one. Hold on one second. Okay, Criterion. Here we go. All right. It says, riveting scenes like these are a reminder that Thin Red Line is not a philosophical tract. It's an action picture, albeit an unorthodox one, where the fighting doesn't start until halfway through, and major stars, John Travolta, George Clooney, turn up in tiny roles. Thanks to Malick's apparently intentional post-production excising, not only to reduce the running time, but also to undermine the hegemony of the Hollywood star system. So good. The film's philosophy comes mainly through the voiceovers, which spend more time asking questions than propounding answers. Malick even takes an amusing swipe at intellectual pretentiousness. On the battlefield, Tall boasts to another officer that he read Homer in Greek during his West Point years, but Malick has made it plain that Tall is a thoroughly shallow individual, pretty much clueless about anything more meaningful than nailing the promotion he has eaten untold buckets of shit to engineer. He could say that Eos Rhododactylos means rosy-fingered dawn, but he's as philosophical as one of those buckets. Yeah, it's the scene where we see rosy-fingered dawn. Actually, when you're watching the film, that is what I thought when I read, maybe just because I'd read Homer right before I saw this, but I saw Rosy Finger Dawn in the sky on the screen. And Nick Nolte says, Eos Rhododactylos, Rosy Finger Dawn. We read Homer at the point in Greek. That's all he says. But the point of that is to say that he is, again, this officer class of the highest tradition, but that's all he has taken in, right? He leaves it up to even Starles to make a philosophical headway about the reality of the situation. Of the many gratifications offered by the Thin Red Line, one of the most enjoyable is teasing out the amazingly wide range of references, literary, poetic, musical, cinematic, that Malick weaves through it. Some allusions are hard to miss, such as the skulls in a ruined Melanesian village that recall avatars of insanity in Francis Ford Coppola's very different war movie, Apocalypse Now. Of course, the skulls, like, oh, just the heads. What's Dennis Hopper say? The heads. Yeah. Sometimes he goes too far, man. Sometimes he goes too far. I can't tell the difference between real life and the movies, man. Also, avatars. We just had DPH talking about avatars, and we talked about the first use of avatar in terms of metaverse and avatar from Snow Crash. Remember, we did our Neil Stevenson analysis way back when. Others are oblique and ephemeral. Spending time in the brig for being AWOL with locals yet again, for instance, Wit has a fleeting vision of a metal plate dotted by circular holes with raised edges, which momentarily fills the screen. This object may or may not be part of his surroundings. It's impossible to tell from the brief look we get, but the circular openings definitely echo the time-worn bases of age-old pillars seen in the opening shot of Kenji Mizoguchi's classic Sancho the Bailiff, another film juxtaposing savagery and redemption. If this connection seems like a stretch, recall that Malick loves Mizoguchi cinema so much that he wrote a stage version of Sancho the Bailiff, produced at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in 1993. Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, for short. Tracing all the connotations of this visual echo would take half an essay in itself. And The Thin Red Line bristles with such evocations, not to mention its multifaceted dialogue with Malick's earlier films, its anticipation of his 2005 epic, The New World, and its implied commentary on the war and historical epic genres. For sheer cultural richness, it has few rivals in modern film. Now, that actually brings me to the 2005 epic, The New World. I was at drama school when they were putting out notices for casting for that movie, and because it was filmed right here in VA, because of course it's about here with John Rolfe and John Smith and Pocahontas and Powhatan, my girlfriend and I both were coming home for Easter, I think. So we both sent out to whatever that casting director's name is. We both wrote our letters and sent in our headshots to see if we could get a part in the movie. And of course, we never heard back. It would have been great to be in that, though, but we didn't have any inroads into it. And we sent them unsolicited, as we didn't have agents. And but it would have been great to do that because they filmed it right here. And by the way, that is a great movie. James Francis says, I'm from Jamestown. Hey, well, shouts out to my fellow Virginian out there, James Francis. Yeah, it was filmed here, and it's a beautiful movie, and it really does justice to Powhatan and a character that I've always loved, which is John Smith, because it talks about Jamestown, the founding of Jamestown, and Christopher Plummer plays Christopher Newport in that, and it's great. It's about 1607, and then of course Bateman himself, Christian Bale, plays John Rolfe in that, and is John Smith is saved by Pocahontas. Everybody knows the tale, but that's a great movie. That's a really good movie. And of course, it's that's probably the only other movie that I like of Terrence Malick's. I haven't watched. I tried to watch Knight of Cups a while back, and there's one with Val Kilmer, but and there's one with Matt Damon and Brad Pitt, but I just can't watch those. I feel like they are sort of derivative of this movie. So before closing, I want to return to the oft-quoted darkness and light soliloquy in the final scene. Oh, my soul, it concludes. Let me be in you now. Look out through my eyes. Look out through the things you made. All things shining. It's a curious passage that doesn't make literal sense. The soldier is asking to be in his soul and for the soul to look out through his eyes, which is an impossible trick unless you do the kind of topological math. Okay, whatever. The statements that all things are shining seems equally amiss, considering the horrors we've been witnessing for almost 3 hours. But in this film's context, the voiceover seems right and lucid. Purist, perfectionist, and obsessive planner though he is, Malick remains a radically intuitive artist, guided by personal visions as surely as the Thin Red Line is haunted and blessed by dematerialized voices of another kind. Neither words nor pictures can lay bare the mysteries of existence, he seems to say, but their combination in cinema can help us know the mysteries are there and sense the truths that underlie them. Malick's intuitive approach explains why the Thin Red Line starts with unanswerable questions. What's this war in the heart of nature? Why does nature vie with itself? It ends with a verbal paradox accompanied by free-flowing images that frame the narrative without dictating its meanings or restricting its ideas. The final image is the most enigmatic of all, a small clump of soil or perhaps a broken coconut shell in a pool of calm water, holding a stalk of new life that reaches out toward the sky with its shoots and towards the earth and its shimmering reflection. Is it a symbol of all things shining? An intimation of immortality in a world inundated with death, a response to the film's opening questions saying that nature can harmonize with itself after all. It's impossible to decide or even to know what all the choices are. And this is precisely what makes it one of the most intensely memorable films I've ever seen. Well, I tend to take issue with that last paragraph because I think that this speaks to the nature of the film itself. Because, yes, that is true about the verbal paradox of, oh, my soul. But that is an allusion to American poems and to even to John Donne, where the speaker is disembodied from his soul and is seeking a kind of reunification because of the way that war has blown apart existence. In other words, if a character like Jim Caviezel's character Wit, he's named Wit, right? He has a wit. He has Shakespeare's wit in this. He speaks rarely, but everything he says in the film is with purpose, right? Is with everything he says in the film is with purpose and has this kind of adept gravitas that the other characters don't have. So he finds himself disembodied within the film because he is a great warrior, but he takes issue with war itself. But when his duty calls for it, after he goes AWOL, he comes right back and he finds himself in the midst of battle. He also, his last moments, spoiler, his last moments in the film, he's surrounded by a what looks like a Japanese dug-in special forces group, and he raises his rifle and essentially has them suicide him, but in an honorable way, in the great tradition of war. So it's like there are two separate and disparate things that are happening with the characters. And it's almost like their soul is crying out for something else that their body won't heed. And then the way that it's illustrated is through verbiage. It's through, it's almost like the film almost functions as like a love song, like Song of Solomon, because a lot of much of the lyric content and the way that the words play musically in the film is almost on a metaphysical, spiritual level where the characters are searching for love and for God's presence in the midst of this war. And when they see that all things shine, the last lines of the movie, all things shining, it shows that nature, as I've said recently in streams, nature is this thing where its center is nowhere and its circumference is everywhere, except for, that's a misnomer, because nature's center is God. And man finds himself in this kind of anti-garden. Obviously, the film is about a fallen world where we find men in a perfect garden of nature where it's post-fall, where nature is cruel, Starles, right? Vines are twisting everything up and there's life and death and the people will live and die. But that doesn't mean that it's not a place where God's light shines through and that there is harmony afterwards. So it's an intensely philosophical film where one has to find one's place in the world. And by watching the film, the viewer, the audience is aware that this is not only real, this is hyper real. This is more true than any of the other war movies that have come out since, in a way that it's not realistic as such, but it is truer. It's truer to what war is as an eternal thing that's been going on. Shouts out to Hirsch, who says, sounds like another great film that I need to see. Yeah, I highly recommend this movie. I think this is the greatest war movie ever made, in my opinion. And it's one of the best movies ever made. It's certainly one of the best movies since, of the last 100 years. It's a fantastic movie. And I can see that people would watch this and they would not get it. But that depends on, I think, your state of mind and where you find yourself and your willingness to sort of look into art, and look into what this guy is saying. Also, Ben Chaplin is in the movie. He went to my drama school. His wife in the movie is played by Miranda Otto. The one thing I don't like in the movie is where she writes a letter to him and she leaves him for like an Air Force guy because he hasn't been around because he's a professional soldier. And so she breaks his heart. That's stupid to me. I didn't like that. Let me show you. Let's see. This Viggo Mortensen was almost in the movie. Let's look at this. This is from 1999. So this gives you an idea of some of the cast. Yeah, Adrian Brody, who has no words in the movie. Ben Chaplin's in it. Jim Caviezel has a big role in it. Nick Nolte, John Travolta plays a small role. Sean Penn, George Clooney is at the end of the film. Woody Harrelson plays a soldier who, spoiler alert, he dies pretty sadly. He stands up and pulls the pin on his grenade, realizes that he pulled the pin. He's holding the pin and not the grenade. And so he jumps back to the ground and shields the rest of his group who he would have killed. And then he says, what an amateur mistake. What a dumbass recruit mistake. He blew his butt off, he says. And then he gets cold and dies. Bill Pullman. I don't know, Bill Pullman in the movie. John Cusack is in the movie. He's great. John C. Reilly, Elias Koteas, Nick Stahl is in the movie. Jared Leto. This is from 1999. Writ with a little less blood and a little more poetry, but the visual and literary variety. Terrence Malick's symphonic adaptation of James Jones's novel about the World War II Battle of Guadalcanal harrows the psyche with its rake-like teeth, even as its beauty intoxicates the eye. Some may rightfully complain that its plot leaves the very issues it raises, life, death, immortality, madness, unresolved, yet the disturbing ideas it plants in the soil of the soul need time and darkness, not light, to germinate. It is an uncommon, emotionally detached, and off-center film. Emotionally detached, that's interesting. It's kind of the opposite of what it is. It's actually emotionally attached. Although there is no main character to root for or even a consistent point of view to cling to, the tale of the fatal randomness of nature plays its themes and counterpoints in a dense and unapologetically symbolic orchestration. Okay, that is not great. That's not great writing. That is abstract and non-defining, and also misses the point completely. The fatal randomness of nature that's not truly what it is about. That implies chaos, and the movie is not about chaos. In a way, it would be what the last analysis said, which would be more of a Gnostic view of chaos and order in counterpoint. If anything, it would be that, but it's certainly not fatal randomness of nature. If I think that anyone with sort of a higher intuition or higher level of discernment or understanding watching this film would immediately recognize that it's about providence. It opens the introspective character aptly named Whit, a handsome private AWOL from the army on the Pacific Island, where he swims, fishes, chats, and builds houses with the natives. The only evidence of military service is the dog tag that dangles from his neck. Over shots of the idyllic island life, a slithering crocodile, and other Melanesian wildlife, Whit muses, what is this war at the heart of nature? This is by way of introduction to the running philosophical voiceover narration that he will share with the rest of the large ensemble cast. Much of the story, in fact, is told in this manner and not through dialogue. How Malick manages to avoid pretension by incorporating these declamatory ruminations into the overall lyric tone. Yeah, that's a good point. Again, that this movie could go very wrong very easily because it could be extremely pretentious and it could completely fall off the rails if it did not have, get out of here, bug, if it did not have grounding in a philosophical, literary, spiritual, and overtly religious tone that is evidenced through the filmmaking. Once recaptured by his tough but compassionate Sergeant Welsh, Witt rejoins Charlie Company, an infantry unit headed to Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands to attack the Japanese stronghold there. Under the monomaniacal leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Tall, a fist-faced, Homer-quoting West Point grad and career warrior fixated on seizing the island at any cost, Witt and Welsh merely become two more unshaven mugs in the anonymous crowd of grunts destined for uncertain slaughter, salvation, or that limbo in between that awaits most men. Although the climactic battle scenes are potent, the initial beach landing is eerily uneventful. Now, that's true. That's a great point. One thing that Malick manages to do there is, again, it's crazy that this movie came out at the same time as Saving Private Ryan, whose central drama is obviously the beach landing at Normandy. So we have that opening scene where Tom Hanks and Tom Sizemore are inside the pillboxes, right? And they're gonna, the boats they're gonna drop the door, and they're all gonna get out, and they're gonna get shot right away. They're gonna get torn up by the guys on the beach. Now, this is being filmed at the same time, so I'm sure. So Malick hadn't seen the dailies from the other film. It just so happens that, I guess, in terms of artistic, intuitive nature and knowing the true story of Guadalcanal and the fact that these guys aren't the Marines in the initial beach landing. These guys are the Army who are mopping up. So it makes sense that what we expect as the audience to be the dramatic point of the movie, which is, they're on the ships, they're going to land, and they're going to get torn up on the beach, turns out to be completely uneventful. In fact, they meet like this old Ewok shaman guy walking through the woods, and he just walks right by him with a machete. There's a scene where they're lying in the reeds and they see a cobra. And we often see this counterpoint with nature where nature, nature is cruel, Starles, but it's the unexpected things that occur in the midst of silence. So for instance, the scene where Jared Leto dies, spoiler alert, he is leading a group of men up a hill, and he does this, this quick movement, and he sends these two guys, and they stand up and they immediately get shot. We also see a scene where the camera's on Jared Leto, and we got all these guys behind him, and they're walking through, and then he gives a signal, and they all fall down, and it's like they were never even there. And we just see waves of grass, and we hear the wind, and we see the beautiful Solomon Island light, and it's like there's nobody there. So the point is that, on the one hand, that human beings are small in the midst of nature, but also that they are important, and that the human drama that's driving this thing, as Sean Penn later says, it's all about, or one of the characters says, it's all about property. Well, you're always going to have that, and that is true in a sense, because they're gaining strategic property, right? And strategic defenses across as a stepping stone across the Pacific for the eventual Japanese invasion. But what we see is that this is a great movie because it shows that the things that seem to be unimportant are the big deal, and people will lose their lives over it. And that it takes all of these human chess pieces to move up this thing. Of course, Nick Nolte fires Starles in the end. He says, "I just think you're too soft. I just think don't worry, I'm going to recommend you for the Silver Star, Starles." He's not AJ talking. He's Nick Nolte, but it's basically the same voice there. And he says, and I'm going to recommend you for the Purple Heart. Purple Heart? For what, sir? For those cuts on your hand and those scratches on your face. It's like Sergeant Slaughter, right? John, included in this strong star-studded cast are John Travolta as a slick general, John Savage as a shell-shocked officer. He is fantastic. John Savage plays a small role in this film, but he is fantastic because he stands up and he's railing against, why did they have to die? For what? Why did they have to die? For what? They were here and now we're there. Woody Harrelson in a brief but dramatic cameo. John Cusack as a brave cynic, and Elias Koteas as the conflict-afflicted company captain who's concerned for his men, puts him at odds with his commanding officer. Now, Elias Koteas, by the way, in this movie is so good. This is an actor. This is the guy who you probably don't know the name of the actor when you see him, and you've seen him in a million different things. We recently saw him in I saw him in the movie Simone, which with Al Pacino, which I talked about kind of in relation to Limitless that I did with DPH. He's in a lot of movies. This is a guy who is like a great theater and film actor, and he's great because he's in so many things and he fits perfectly into the backdrop, and you don't know his name, and he's not a movie star, and you totally believe his character in this movie. He is fantastic. He is not sympathetic in this movie. You feel that this guy is a coward. But he has his reasons for doing what he does. He doesn't want to send his men up and have them all. He says, I've lived with these men. These men are like my sons. They're like my sons to me. And he doesn't want to get them killed. So you feel sympathy for him, but you also feel that he has a sense he is a coward. But the actor is great. Ultimately, The Thin Red Line isn't about who won or lost Guadalcanal. Malick, who also wrote the script, is aiming for something higher than a story about ballistics and military strategy. It can be called an anti-war film, but its disdain for the very conventions of the medium making it anti-war film. Great. The Thin Red Line is a movie about creation, growing out of destruction. So Ordo Al Caio? No, it's not. It's not about that. About love where you'd least expect to find it, and about angels, especially the fallen kind who just happen to be men. Take issue with that. They're not fallen angels. They are men living in a fallen world who have angelic aspects to them because they save other people, but they're not fallen angels. I get what he's saying there. Yes, he's in Shutter Island, says Jethro. Yes, absolutely. He's great in Shutter Island. Okay, so let's see. What about, so I did the Criterion. I did that was Washington Post. There's one more. Viggo Mortensen was supposed to be in this movie, but he turned down a role. He turned down a role in it. And Viggo Mortensen, by the way, is great in another war movie, kind of war movie of the time, which is G.I. Jane. Have you seen G.I. Jane? He's actually with Demi Moore. He's actually great in that movie. But there is another one here that I was going to look at. Where is it? Let There Be Light. Yes, this is from Film Comment magazine, and I actually had this magazine back in the day, and I had this article, and I can't find it, so I just found it online. So I'm just going to take you through this last one. Thanks for sticking with me here, you guys and gals. If you want to support the stream, you can like the stream, you can share it on your socials, share it out to your friends and family. I sure would appreciate it. We're doing well here. We've got some streams coming up. If you want to support me with super chats, you can click that super chat button down there. You can support me, Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. Really appreciate you. I'm going to have a lot more literature coming up. And to close this out, after I read this, I'm going to look at a couple of different examples of war literature if we have time. And then I'm going to move on from there. And of course, I will be back. I'll be back Thursday night with Maddie, Real Cooter Brown, over at Digital Minefield, covering the Bonfire of the Vanities. Thursday night on ACR for Boiler Room, and then Friday. What's Friday? We got something Friday. Oh, Friday is DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos. And then, of course, Shakespearean streams coming up. But if you want to see me, you guys, if you want to see me on other people's channels, we need to get some guests, or I need to get over on some other people's channels and get the word out and keep on moving here, because we've been going about a year and a half, and we need to kind of branch out and say what we're going to say in other places too. For instance, I mean, if you want to see me do, for instance, like I have an idea for a Southern Gothic stream. If you want me to cover William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor and Edgar Allan Poe, then let JD know. We can. He's over there in California right now doing his thing. So if you want to see me do a stream, another literary analysis stream with Jay, do that. Or let me know some people's streams that you guys watch that we haven't talked to before. Let me know. So that would be cool. Okay, so this is Let There Be Light, the Thin Red Line. I'm just going to kind of barrel through this one. This is from Film Comment Magazine. Ordered to advance up a long hill towards a concealed Japanese position in broad daylight, a callow infantry lieutenant, a kid really, signals to his two scouts to advance. Then, when they don't move, signals again more forcefully. That's Jared Leto in the movie. The two GIs trade looks and are up and running. From above, the first shots of this battle erupts. Two brief bursts drop both men, and silence falls again. The long grass ripples in the breeze, and then magnificent sunlight unfolds across the landscape as if a signal from the heavens. The lieutenant sounds the charge, and he and his men rise up and rush toward the forwards to be decimated by the machine gun nests and mortars lying in wait for them. That glorious epiphany of radiance and the terrible carnage that ensues together form one breathtaking movement and encapsulate one of the main principles at work in Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line. There's Jim Caviezel right there. So again, this is relevant because Jim Caviezel, he's got his movie out now. The new Passion of the Christ is going to be coming out. And also because we are in the forever wars. Of course, the movie is about 1943 in Guadalcanal and World War II, but it's interesting that this movie was made pre-Big Nine, and I've been watching a bunch of movies about post-Big Nine war, including The Covenant, Jarhead, The Yellow Birds, all these different movies, Rendition, what's the Body of Lies with Leo, and they're great movies, but war is such a big thing to encapsulate and to tell like these stories in terms of film. There's so much, and this is a great example of something that is not often told, and it's not often looked at in this sense. And so one thing that remains the same for all this is obviously the forever war and how it keeps going, and how the nature of it doesn't change in a sense, right? So I mean, look at what's going on right now. So I just think it's important to remember these films. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that, like, I'm reading excerpts from film magazines that were prevalent in the late 90s and early 2000s, and you don't get these anymore. These hardly exist. It's hard to find them. Even digital copies that come out now, it's hard to find them. Publishers don't want to give real estate to film analysis like of a higher order, like I think these articles tend to be. And so it's important to go back and look at films and how people used to write about them. Of course, we know friends who write books about stuff like this, like Esoteric Hollywood, and we get YouTube, where we get Rob Eger's analyses of films and other people. But to see these sorts of things in print is pretty rare nowadays. There's truly never been a film about modern war quite like this one, a kind of lyric epic poem about the way men are transformed for good by the experience of war, carefully balancing romanticism and dispassion, action and introspection. Like Malick's Badlands and Days of Heaven, it is spare, fleet, elliptical, and establishes a careful middle distance from the circumstances of its characters, disarming the processes of audience identification and implication for all the briefest of moments. More significantly, and unlike Saving Private Ryan, it also seems determined to evade the mythopoeic impulse, that which makes a film larger than life and proffers it to stand in for history. That's great. That's a great paragraph because, for one, when it talks about the ellipticism in war, that's what we were just covering with Ernest Hemingway. Adapted from James Jones's 1962 novel, The Thin Red Line chronicles the experiences of men of Charlie Company who are part of the American force charged with seizing the strategically important tropical island of Guadalcanal from the Japanese in 1942 and 1943. I had a great book on that. I can't find it. It was a book I had since childhood, but I can't find it. With certain notable additions and adjustments, Malick extracts his basic events and characters intact from Jones's narrative. The disembarkation, landing, and march inland of the company's protracted battle to take a hill stubbornly defended by Japanese troops, which is the main body of the film. A period of R&R away from the front after the company's victory, the self-sacrifice of a soldier that enables his company to escape from advancing Japanese forces, also invented by Malick. The departure of the surviving members of the company from Guadalcanal. And there's Sean Penn really looking the part, right? Talking to Jim Caviezel. And he says, "What? There's just this one, right? Where Saving Private Ryan establishes its, here we go, Saving Private Ryan, its primary characters within minutes and its secondary ones by the beginning of the second act, and then creates a GI microcosm through the device of the mission, which is pretty cheap, by the way, in Saving Private Ryan. It's like, it's so obvious. Oh, we're going to send these guys out because the brother's not alive and because, the mom, don't want to come home to having all of her 5 sons killed. So we're going to send him out and we're going to get Matt Damon in the movie. I mean, that's great. That's great in the film. I'm actually not denigrating the movie, but it becomes much more forced in that movie than it is in this. The Thin Red Line is more of an ensemble film and takes a much more leisurely and oblique approach. You may be halfway into the film before you figure out you should be watching in narrative terms. Even then, Malick keeps directing your attention to somebody you've never seen before and may never see again, which presents minor problems of emphasis when recognizable actors like Woody Harrelson briefly pass through. I think that's brilliant about the movie. That's brilliant. That's like brilliant about the movie, that we see these people in the movie. We recognize them as major Hollywood actors, and then they disappear. So it's showing that they're all equal in this sense. They're all in the battle. We're not supposed to follow one or the other. There's little sense of the camaraderie associated with World War II, or is it only World War II films? You get the feeling these men barely know and don't much like each other. And Malick refuses to be sentimental. That's great. Like Jones's novel, the film doesn't have a protagonist, but shifts from one character's point of view to another. But where Jones scrutinizes the calculations and rationalizations going on in his characters' heads to show that their actions are determined as much by, for example, preoccupation with how others perceive them as by fear of death, Malick, by contrast, takes most of his characters at face value. In fact, he pointedly keeps all but a few of them deliberately sketchy and undefined. The only defining moments that matter to him are those that convey a significant response to or perspective on war as an experiential event of the profoundest magnitude. As much as anything, the raison d'etre of the stunning sequence where Captain Gaff, John Cusack, leads a small group of men in an attack on an impregnable machine gun bunker complex is to witness the emotional aftermath for the survivors on both sides. Though Malick has inherited his title from Jones, who in turn derived it from an old Midwestern saying, "There's only a thin red line between the sane and the mad," his film is as much about the psychic fortifications men construct in order to survive war as it is about its psychic and moral consequences. This is fantastic. One of the key elements of the unique cinematic idiom Malick established in his first 2 films was his use of refractive voiceover. It is equally integral to the articulation of the Thin Red Line, if not more so, but there are pronounced differences in how it is applied. Where the earlier films offer a single, more naive than unreliable narrator, The thin red line dispenses with narration altogether, replacing it with multiple subjective voiceovers, sometimes accompanied by fleeting visual flashbacks that insinuate themselves into the action as it proceeds. These fleeting glimpses into the characters' souls or semi-coherent fragments of thought are presented in a variety of registers from naturalistic to poetic. But just as the narrations in Malick's earlier films create a certain poignant distance, here, direct access to the inner lives of these men, however glancing and intermittent, creates a singular push-pull of intimacy and distance and reinforces the sense of the GI's isolation from one another. Each is imprisoned in his subjecthood. I hope you guys get what I'm doing here. I mean, I know I'm reading like large excerpts from these particular movie analyses that I've sort of curated, and I don't often do that. Although we're a literature channel and I read large excerpts of books, I'm still doing this with commentary, but I'm trying to give you a sense of, number one, the movie analysis itself and how it's changed over the years and how we can still find bits of good, insightful analysis into films where we don't necessarily have to believe or take everything at face value that we read. We can have disputes with the words, but also that the words are trying to probe the depths of what this film means. And I think that this film really calls for that sort of thing. Also, this I do this because if I put myself in your shoes as the audience, there's nothing that I like more, honestly. And you may disagree with this, but like when I go on a long trip, especially if I'm driving like 16 hours down south or something, there's nothing that I like more than having someone just talk about something that I care about for long periods, such as movies or literature, or oftentimes it'll be something that's funny, but something where I can just listen to another person talk to me, and I don't have to. I can actively think about it, but I can just sort of relax in the what Jack Kerouac calls the holy contour of life, right? Which is what literature does. That's why a lot of people will listen to books on tape, etc. But hopefully this will be something interesting, and they're talking points. They're things that you can talk about with your friends and think about for yourself. And I just find this interesting. I find this like really supremely interesting because film is so important in terms of the artistic medium of the era. There's nothing yet that has taken its place. I mean, I think that honestly, I think opera is the highest art because it combines the libretto of poetry. It combines classical music, architecture, and stage design, the theater. It combines all of the best art in one mode and puts it all together, which is why it's a high art and is often inaccessible to us. But film sort of attempts to accomplish that for a more modern or a more postmodern or a more contemporary audience, because it's easily accessible and it only costs a couple bucks, or you go to the theater and you see it, right? And it has all of this stuff put into it, and it's over in 2 hours. So it also conveys what it's like to live in the world we do now in a more appropriate way than oftentimes more esoteric or metaphysical art mediums will do. So, I mean, movies they still reign supreme. That won't be forever. One day there will be, some sort of metaverse, virtual reality, first person, Ready Player One, epic narrative in which you are actually part of it. But in terms of passive art, where you can just sit back and relax and watch, that's film. So who doesn't like film? So, if anything, if somebody's driving across the country right now, or like you've got this downloaded on your phone and you can just listen on your phone, while you're flying to California or Mississippi or Iceland. I'm supposed to go to. I don't want to say too much, but I may be going to Iceland in the fall, around Thanksgiving. So I cannot wait for that. I thought that day would never come again because of Great Reset and because of airplanes and all this shit. But there seems to be a little window in how we can travel, so I might as well take advantage of it. And so I'm gonna head off to Iceland. And speaking of which, I'll be doing a stream on Icelandic sagas coming up. I promised that one a long time ago. That was about March, so I really need to get to that one. So I'll be getting to that one soon. All right, so it says. There's nothing systematic about how Malick deploys this device. Some characters are heard from only once, others frequently. But for the most part, the relevance of their sentiments derives from their diverging philosophical implications, which add up to a spectrum of bitter wisdoms and consoling beliefs. The Christianity of Captain Starles, Elias Codius, who prays for the safety of his men, and that is in the film. He explicitly suffers and prays for his men in the film, which is wonderful to see. The regressive savagery of Private Dale, who collects the gold-filled teeth of dead Japs. The mystical connection of Ben Chaplin, feels towards the wife he loves. So Ben Chaplin's character makes his way through the movie by almost daydreaming, almost dissociating back to these wonderful pastoral idyllic scenes of love, of like really, high, pure love with his wife, until that falls apart, just like the war has made war on his own relationships and soul. And the hard pragmatism of Colonel Tall, who expends soldiers' lives in the hope of jumpstarting a stalled career. We're afforded several poignant glimpses into his horrified self-awareness. These take their place alongside a number of more conventionally observed moments and pronouncements. The matter-of-fact, every man for himself existentialism of Sergeant Welsh, who has no illusions about what wars are fought over. Property. The whole thing's about fucking property, he says. Quote, and the young GI on the troop ship who puts his faith in the Lord and the next breath talks of buying a car when he gets home. The breakdown of Sergeant Macron, John Savage, first seen leading his men in prayer aboard the landing craft. Later, mind broken by the futility of his best efforts, raving, "We're just dirt," which is biblical, right? It is biblical. We're just dirt. Like sands through the hourglass. These are the days of our lives. If there's a central character in the Thin Red Line, I mean, we're not just dirt. We're more than dirt, but to dust we shall return, right? In the Thin Red Line, it is Private Wit, Jim Caviezel, in an enigmatic and charismatic presence who marches to a different drummer, much like Martin Sheen's Kit in Badlands. The minor character in the novel, a crazy, sentimental Kentuckian sharpshooter who longs for a chance to save the lives of his fellow soldiers, is reinvented as a serene Emersonian idealist with negative capability to spare. That's great. That's a great sentence. So we've actually done Ralph Waldo Emerson. Remember, that was like one of the third stream that we did. We talked about the Gnosticism in Emerson's nature. His speculative voiceover, frequently framed in unanswered questions, contemplates man's fallen spiritual condition and yearns for communion with the sublime in decidedly poetic cadences. Why can't we stay on the heights we're capable of? We know the glory for a while and then fall back into separateness, strife, division. Wit's apartness and affinity for otherness is clear from the outset. In a prologue that is entirely Malick's invention, we see him living among the Melanesians, the indigenous people of the Solomon Islands, leading an idyllic existence, clearly AWOL. As punishment, he is transferred to a stretcher bearer duty, then later rejoins Charlie Company during the fighting. Whether tending to the wounded or in the thick of combat, Wit functions as a representation of near extinct American transcendentalism, to which allusion is also made in the use of Charles Ives's music. From the vantage point of a romantic philosophical perspective, Wit can contemplate his own death and formulate a response. Recalling his mother's death in words that carry a faint echo of Linda Manz's narration in Days of Heaven, he thinks, I couldn't find nothing beautiful or uplifting about her going back to God. I heard people talking about immortality, but I hadn't seen it. I wondered how it would be when I died. What did it be like to know that this breath now was the last one you was ever going to draw? I just hope I can meet it the same way she did, with the same calm, because that's where it's hidden, the immortality I haven't seen. If Saving Private Ryan offers a kind of total experience of war, deeply invested in enthralling spectacle, unassailable visual mastery, and the rejuvenation of a specific iconography of archetypal characters and symbolic situations, then The Thin Red Line proposes a more abstracted and interiorized anti-spectacle in which the viewer's attention is repeatedly directed away from the action and towards ostensibly irrelevant sights and sounds. The distancing sound techniques Malick first deployed in Badlands are all present and correct here. Recessive sound shifts, silence, foregrounding of music and voiceover. The genuinely radical sense of visual emphasis that he developed in Days of Heaven is also in place. The disregard for prevailing narrative cinema conventions concerning the visually admissible and inadmissible, which at the time were dismissed as an unseemly, self-indulgent preoccupation with minutiae and the scenic. The time around Malick is more successful. This time around, Malick is more successful in integrating his transcendental aesthetics with his thematic framework. So it goes on to talk about how the movie really unites this sublime and the transcendent with the war and degradation and violence in terms of a situation that is otherworldly and that is unpredictable. Because as it says here, jungle, sky, water, texture, space, and light impose metaphysical perspective and reaffirm an order and harmony in the world that makes a war pale in significance. And there's one great example in this film, which is, it says, just before the fighting resumes on the hill, a young GI lying in the grass reaches out to touch a tiny leaf whose delicate fronds gently close on contact. This interpolation, as immaterial as it is exquisite, is absolutely representative of Malick's cinematic sensibility. So that is the film, The Thin Red Line. And just some lines from the movie to close out. He says, war don't ennoble men. It turns them into dogs, poisons the soul of, and I thought that was interesting because that is in counterpoint to the way that those things are expressly shown in Saving Private Ryan, but they're almost in your face. This is a great example of showing, not telling, and Saving Private Ryan is the opposite. He says, love, where does it come from? Who lit this flame in us? No war can put it out, conquer it. I was a prisoner. You set me free. So there he's talking in the second person to both us, the audience, and also to his love, but also to God. He's obviously talking in his interior dialogue, in his inner monologue. He's speaking to God. So he's at the absolute depth of death and destruction, on the point of non-existence, but he is reaching out to God in this movie. He says, if I never meet, Sean Penn at the end of the movie says, if I never meet you in this life, let me feel the lack. A glance from your eyes, and my life will be yours, all things shining. So that's it. That is The Thin Red Line, 1998 by Terrence Malick. And I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of long digression or discussion into this film, and I really highly recommend it. And maybe I'm just being sentimental. Maybe it's something that's occurred to me recently, but I don't think of myself as overly. I've talked about my own feelings of patriotism before. I think I have a fairly unique perspective on patriotism in the sense that I lived abroad for a number of years. And so my own sense of what it means to be an American and to love this country that's given me everything is unique. And I don't talk about it. I try not to talk about it in sentimental ways, but I think that one of the things that happens in this, globalist, um, just gobbledygook that we live in now is that a part of it that's really subtle is it wants to take us away from any sort of allegiances or loyalty. And like, even from the people that, even from, our own sides of things, right? Because we see that the people that are in charge misuse those things, and they often, they do things in our name, right? And that is truly the case. But it doesn't mean that I can't be thankful for, where I am and where I live in the South in this country. And I'm not, it's not to say like, oh, American exceptionalism and, all that stuff. I don't really take to any of that stuff, but I do realize that there are, people that fight for good things, whether or not the leaders that send them there, are using them as cannon fodder. There are people that, there is still such a thing as honor in this world. There's honor, there's glory, and there's a code that some people still have, and I respect that. And I and when I see that in art, it strikes a nerve with me. So this movie really does strike a nerve with me, and not in the way that Saving Private Ryan does. This is a completely different movie. I think it speaks to more of a poetic, metaphysical beauty, which is interesting that it's found amongst the war, right? So yes, I am an American, and I mean, my granddad fought in that war, and he would have given his life, and he's, by the grace of God, he survived, and therefore I'm here. So and he was a great man. He was a great man. So movies like this, they get to me. So anyway, enough of that. So let's give some shouts out here to some of the people that have supported me for this stream. Shouts out to let's see, was that this stream? Nico, who sends $1.99, says bravo. Thank you, Nico. Really appreciate you. I think that was the stream. If not, thank you anyway to Nico. Oh, we're going way back here in this thing. Yes. Shouts out to Digital Minefield, who sent $4.99. Elias, who sent $4.99. Shouts out to Jack, who sent that $10 super chat with no question or comment. Thank you, Jack. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Hirsch for that $5 super chat. Sounds like another great film I need to see. Yes, I recommend that you watch this film. And then thank you to my supporters here. Shouts out to Alan, who sends $15 via PayPal. Thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciate you. That is very kind and very generous of you. Thank you so much. Let's see. Shouts out again to the real John Connor for that $20 that he sent me on Cash App. Really appreciate you. And thank you so much, big time, to my big supporter, Kevin. Really appreciate you. Yes. Kira says big difference between government and fatherland. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's about it, you guys. Shouts out to Herman there for that $8 super chat. Always worthwhile, BLA. Muchas gracias. Well, de nada. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate all your support as always. And again, coming up, I had a bunch of, you can probably see it here. I had a bunch of other stuff lined up for us to talk about here. I've got a whole book on Homer's Iliad and poetry in Homer. I've got Gerard Manley Hopkins, which is referenced. I got Theodore Rothke, John Donne, and Batter My Heart, Holy Sonnet 14. Later on, I'll be covering at some point. I've got to figure out a way to cover Jack London and Ben Franklin. And then also later on, I've also got Walt Whitman in here, and then Taming of the Shrew and Shakespeare on Love. That'll be a completely different stream than this one because we'll be talking about Sonnet 18. Shakespeare, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. We'll be talking about Shakespeare and Much Ado About Nothing and Taming of the Shrew. And so that's about it, you guys. I will see you all tomorrow night or whenever. We got a lot coming up. So thank you all. Really appreciate you. And I guess to play us out, here's Rooks G and a cut off his new album. Let me see if I can get him to take it away here. There we go. Keep playing. There we go. Okay. I'm on StreamYard. So I'm trying.